There are a lot of things I love about The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Fantastic gameplay, a massive expanded world, lore stacked upon lore after lore. And let's be honest, you can build some truly cursed contraptions in this game. But it has a huge problem and a bizarre mystery. See, for all of the freedom and creativity this game gives you, there's one complaint everyone has. Your weapons break. Like, all of them. Except for the Master Sword, which doesn't break, it just needs a nap. I gotta get this ready, dude. Hold on. But what if I told you that you can actually repair weapons in this game? Yeah, Nintendo made it possible, but in the absolute weirdest way possible. It's not a blacksmith, not a fairy fountain, not even some magical repair shrine. Nope, you give your weapons to an Octorok. That's right, those sucky balloon monsters. They slurp it up, chew it up, and then spit it back out at you. And suddenly, it's repaired. But not just that, it's buffed. Like, forget about Nintendo simply just making this Goron blacksmith here and Goron City repair stuff. No. They decided to use Octorocks. But what in the Zelda goddesses is happening here? How are Octorocks repairing weapons? Well, my wife, who is a doctor in animal behavior and biology, and myself jumped on our Sheikah Slate computers and decided to investigate. Let's break it down. We came up with 3 theories before jumping into the game. 1. Octorocks somehow sharpen weapons with something they have inside of their bodies. 2. They use some sticky liquid that they secrete in their body that allows weapons to be glued back together, like some sort of organic glue. And 3. Octorocks have some magical abilities that we aren't aware of that actually can repair items. AKA, it's dumb magic. And wouldn't you know it, after a few days of research, we had our answer. But before we go any further, we need to learn about blacksmithing and how making a weapon happens. Look, I know this has nothing to do with a video game, but stick with me, it's important. Now, I used to be a blacksmith on the side. Yeah, I actually made cabinet knobs and even forged this knife right here. When forging a weapon, you need to get 3 things right. The steel, the shape, and the temperature. The steel is very important in this kind of business. You need something that is going to harden when treated and is going to hold up to time. This knife was actually made with spring steel, which, fun fact, it's the same kind of steel used in car suspensions. Now, as a blacksmith, once you have your steel down, you heat the metal up in a forge and begin to shape the blade. Alternatively, though, you can actually grind away the metal and shape the blade that way. Sometimes it's easier to do that versus banging on the metal until you get into the right shape. But to do that sort of thing, you really need a low grit belt. Once you've got your blades shaped, it is time to heat treat. You take a very hot blade, you quench it, usually in oil, not water, and that hardens it. And probably something that I've never told anybody, but I use canola oil to quench my blades. Terrible for fries, great for swords. You're probably wondering, why don't you just use water? And the answer is pretty simple, because water can cool the metal down too rapidly. And if metal cools down too fast, it can actually crack, which, well, for something you plan to use against Lionels, isn't a good thing. If done right, a blade can last hundreds, if not thousands of years without breaking. It'll dull over time for sure, but that's fixable. You just sharpen it back up. So in reality, weapons should be breaking so easily like they do in Tears of the Kingdom. The blacksmiths in Hyrule need to be fired. Pun intended. But maybe your weapons in Tears of the Kingdom aren't breaking exactly. Maybe they're just getting too dull to use. But how would an Octorok fix that? Let's focus on the rock Octorocks, the ones that slurp in junk and fire out exploding rocks like jerks. Have you ever looked closely at those rocks before? They're weirdly sharp, jagged, and almost shaped. And that could be a clue. A clue that indicates Octorocks are capable of sharpening. But how could they be doing this? They're a land octopus, for crying out loud. Well, to investigate that, we need to look at some real animals. You know, like in our world. This is a bird. You may have seen it before. But did you know that birds eat grit and pebbles to help break down their food? They store it in their gizzards, and they act kind of like internal teeth. And those rocks help digest and break down food for the birds. Kind of a nutty fact when I first heard it. I almost couldn't believe it. Kind of like how I couldn't believe the CDI Zelda games existed when I discovered those. Ugh. But guess what? Octorocks don't have teeth either, but they do slurp in debris, polish a rock, and launch it at you. So it kind of makes sense that they might eat rocks to help grind up their food for digestion. Okay, but what does this have to do with polishing or sharpening? I'm glad you asked, because rocks are actually used for that. Nowadays, we use different grit belts to actually grind away metal for sharpening. But traditionally, you would use stones for sharpening weapons. These are often referred to as whetstones. Typically, you would start with a lower grit, something in the hundreds. And I like 400 or 600 for myself. And you would work on the edge of the blade. And then you would work your way up something in the thousands for sharpening the edge. The higher the grit, the most polished the blade actually looks, even to the point you can get a mere polish, like this blade that I made. I can actually see myself in that. So maybe Octorocks use high grit rocks inside their bellies to grind and polish weapons. That's actually not that far-fetched. So you toss a rusty sword in their mouth instead of debris, maybe they just sharpen that instead of working on a rock. But there is a new problem that we encounter here. What about the weapons that aren't blades? Clubs, shields, cracked bows, those don't get any sharper. So how do they get repaired? Okay, well, let's talk about glue. Early in the game, Link gets the ability to stick things together with magic green cement glue. You know, the one you've used to build that horrifying monstrosity that I'm judging you for. It's better than mine. But have you noticed the heads of Octorocks lately? They've got random stuff glued to them. Rocks, treasure chests, snow, even grass. And I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say they're probably not growing treasure chests out of their heads. So that means they must be secreting some kind of adhesive, a natural glue to stick things to themselves, changing themselves into what kind of Octorok they want to be. Kind of like a hermit crab picking a new shell. And where would that glue be produced? Well, probably in the same stomach where they're digesting debris and prepping the rocks to launch at you. Even when you look at an Octorok sucking in its surroundings, you see smaller rocks, but never large boulders like the one it shoots at you. Meaning they're probably sucking in those smaller rocks and forming the large boulder. So when they slurp in your weapon, they're probably coating it in some stomach glue and then spitting it out repaired. Gross, yeah, but it's effective. But interestingly, did you know millions of animals in our world, you know, the real one, actually secrete sticky substances like glue? Madagascar tomato frogs secrete a sticky white substance from their skin when threatened, which acts as a glue self-defense mechanism. This secretion can gum up predators' mouth or eyes, effectively incapacitating them and allowing the frog to escape. Speaking of frogs, several of them and insects use glue to bind their eggs to surfaces, kind of like how Link binds things together in Tears of the Kingdom. Other insects like codling moths lay eggs in spirals, and they're glued together around fruit tree twigs. And probably the most notable animals with a sticky substance, the silk spiders. These spiders have certain threads in their web coated with glue that is high in water content. This helps it keep wet and sticky to trap their prey. I mean, I could go on. Velvet worms are invertebrates that use specialized glands to spray ribbons of mucus from cannons near their face. The mucus rapidly hardens, ensnaring insect prey and preventing their escape. Hagfish, when threatened by predators, secrete remarkable slime that rapidly expands into voluminous, hardening gel, which can clog the gills of attacking fish or allow the hagfish to slip away unharmed. The red-legged salamander produces a unique, highly adhesive secretion as a defense mechanism when threatened. This thick liquid is produced by two types of glands in the salamander's skin, and upon exposure to air, the secretion rapidly hardens, creating a sticky barrier that can deter or even trap predators. Therefore, after listing all these animals, just a drop in the bucket that is our world of actual animals that secrete a glue-like substance, it is not out of the realm of possibility that Octorocks have some abilities like this, or a melting pot of all these abilities. Interestingly, most of the substances that I listed harden when exposed to air. So that means that Octorok stomachs, they could secrete something that hardens around your weapon when it's exposed to air. Which, with the balloon-like nature of an Octorok, it could hold quite a bit of air up there and harden things. But, like our first theory, there's a tiny problem. And that's the fact that Octorocks, they don't just repair your weapon. Oh no, they buff them too with magic, making bows suddenly shoot more arrows. Which, by the way, is absolutely awesome when you're using bombs. Gosh, this never gets old. So to explain the buff that you receive from an Octorok, we bring in our last theory, and one that I hate to bring up. The only explanation Mama Goron and I could come up with for weapons becoming stronger is magic. And as dumb as that might sound, it makes sense for the Zelda universe. I mean, after all, Hyrule is a strange place. You time warp around with an ocarina. Gorons casually chill in lava. Even Deku shrubs shrink to unimaginable sizes and fit into bottles. Yeah, that happened. So maybe it is all just magic and can be explained through that. But I don't think that is entirely the case here. Because if magic could repair weapons and shields in Tears of the Kingdom, why then are Gorons not capable of doing that? Like our blacksmith friend here in Goron City. Unless Nintendo deliberately did not want us to repair weapons for whatever reason. But magic exists in the world of Zelda. Heck, even armor you have gets upgraded in Tears of the Kingdom by magic, by the fairies in the fairy fountain. Or is Link receiving the upgrade here and not the armor? However, I think it's likely that magic might play a little role here. But even more likely, the conclusion we have to come to, or the one that we want to believe, is that the truth is a mix of all three theories. That weapons go down to some sort of gizzard in an Octorok, get sharpened by high grit rocks, coated in some sort of sticky glue-like substance that it secretes, probably the very same slime or goo that they use to make the rocks. Then when the weapons hit the air, the slime hardens and repairs the weapon. And that just happens to also make items magically better. Octorocks are weird, but at least now we have some scientific theories how they're repairing weapons in the Tears of the Kingdom. So what do you think? Are they magical blacksmith balloons? Sticky weapon surgeons? Or is this just all Nintendo being peak Nintendo by coming up with the most roundabout way to repair weapons in a video game? Let me know down in the comments below, and I look forward to reading your thoughts and theories. My name is Papa Goron. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.
Where have you been? Been searching all along. Confusing twilight on and on without a clue.
Getting this footage was so funny. I legit kept getting hit by these stupid rocks, and all while trying to catch them in midair for footage. Spoilers for you all out there, you have to use the time power in order to stop the rocks for a moment. Jeez, man, Octorocks suck. Get it? Oh, suck. Oh boy. Yep. Couldn't have gone one video without making a terrible dad joke.
Apples masquerade, hide in both face and mind, all free for you to draw. I'm a shapeshifter, what else should I be? Please don't take off my mask, reveal it.